So the only difference between a salary and slavery is at least the slave knows that it isn't free. So that's what I'm going to start off with. So my talk today, anyway, is examining the pros and cons of change. So if you are changing job, maybe you're changing a career. Who's here to change a career? Who's here just for a wee look? Lots of friends here today. There's no harm in having a look, but we all change for various reasons, and we'll get into that in a few minutes anyway. I have 5 key points today. The reason I say 5 is at least, if you're getting bored of me, at least you know how long I've left to go. So I'm going to make you a little bit uncomfortable now. Could everybody come up and fill the seats in the front, because I want everybody sitting beside somebody, hopefully a stranger. Guys down at the back, I'm going to go down and move you up. Everybody's very shy here. Okay, is everybody sitting beside somebody? So what I want you to do is, you turn and talk to this lady here. Okay, for 1 minute, I want you to turn to the person next to you, and just introduce yourself. Say a few things about yourself, why you're here, and then for the next minute, swap over. Is that okay? So 1 minute, ready to go now. Okay, so 1 minute up, swap over, and the other person tell you about each other now. Yeah. Good. Okay, everybody. God, they're getting involved in it now. Well done, everybody. Did you enjoy that? Time flew, didn't it? I've got to say, that was the longest 2 minutes of my life. Tell me something. Could anybody put your hands up? Who has told a lie in the last 12 months? There's very few hands going up. That's kind of surprising. In the last month? You're in disbelief here. I'm in disbelief. What about the last week? Who has told a lie? How about the last 24 hours? So, okay, let's frame it another way. We'll put this to the test. When you've been going somewhere, how many of you have actually picked up the phone and said, "I'm on the way. I'm nearly there." You haven't even left the house yet. Yeah, there you go. Very honest people now. And who has texted while driving? Some honest people. Some very proud of that. Who hasn't washed their hands after using the public bathrooms? Okay, one honest people. It's interesting to note that more people are willing to admit that they texted while driving, because that's the thing that can kill somebody else, do you know? And interestingly, when you were talking to each other that time, statistically, 85% of you told 3 lies in that minute. We like to portray a version of ourselves that we believe. Maybe we believe it's true, maybe we hide some of the truths. And we also do that to ourselves when we're thinking about changing. We're shaped by what's around us. We're shaped by initially our family. So our family, our intimate networks, our community. Do you know, when we're growing up, then we kind of shape an idea of ourselves. What makes a good person when I grow up? Do you know, what am I going to do? Am I going to be a fireman? Am I going to be a doctor? Am I going to be a nurse? We're shaped by the institutions then as well. So institutions and social norms both kind of feed into culture. Do you know, so am I going to get married? Am I going to have 1.3 children? What sort of a job do I need to have when I'm looking after a family? Am I going to grow old? Am I going to look forward to grandchildren? Historical forces come into play then as well, so that's geopolitical, and of course our general landscape around us then as well. So did you grow up on a farm? Do you know, is the track of the welly still below the knees? Some of you are very familiar with that, other people maybe not so. Do you have calloused hands? So these are all the things that shape our idea of ourselves. And when we think about change, all these ideas come into force, and we do lie to ourselves because maybe deep down here we want to be something else. Maybe we want to be the artist, and we say, "Oh, but Mammy would prefer if I had a real job." Do you know? Maybe I want to be an actress. Do you know? I'm sure you've often been asked, "When are you going to get a real job?" Me too. There we go. So just a little about myself there as well. This is how I was shaped. This is where I grew up. Very proud of it. Very beautiful place. Back in the 80s, you know, you couldn't ask for a better place to grow up. It was also quite tough as well. I mean, unemployment was quite high. The only job to do really is get qualified, come back, maybe go into tourism, some bar work, or the fishing boats. I didn't fancy being out in the North Atlantic freezing my ass off. So I went into hotel management, and I had great fun doing that. I'm pointing the wrong direction. So I enjoyed that for a few years in my 20s, the bright lights, the big smoke, and then it was time to settle down, have kids, maybe even find somebody first. That was a bit of a difficulty. It was great fun back in the day, but once you start thinking about settling down, maybe you need to get a job that doesn't involve working till 2, 3, 4, 5 in the morning and starting again the next morning at 6 a.m. So that was my first career, and my first career change then came about when I did decide that I needed more regular hours. So in terms of making the decision to change, it was an easy decision to make because I knew I wanted some bit of a change. Going back to where I grew up, we did everything ourselves. So at home, I did all the painting, decorating, wallpaper, and fixing things, bit of light carpentry. So it was a natural progression that, you know, while I was looking for a real job, I went out with the paintbrush in the hand and I went into painting and decorating. And I suppose life took over. I got busy. The job was very, very good to me. But then I started hitting my 40s and I kind of realised, well, do I still want to be climbing ladders and working outside in the cold winter days when I'm in my 60s? And the answer was no. So I looked into, I suppose, going back to the hotel business, I often thought of myself as the psychologist. Do you know, when you're working behind the bar and you're counselling couples and you're counselling the guys that are afraid to go home to their missus. And even one guy started bawling one night at the bar. Oh, and he was drunk as a lord. And I said, "Geez, what's wrong with you?" "Jesus, I'm 65 years of age and I'm still afraid to go home to my mother drunk." Do you know? So when I thought back to that, and I always had an interest in psychology and people, went to have a look around it. So there was a lot of obstacles. So I have bills to pay. I couldn't afford to take time off work and go to college full time. So that was kind of a little bit of an obstacle. What other ways around it are there? So I looked into these little modules bit by bit by bit. So my goal is still maybe to do a PhD ultimately, maybe after the children get theirs, I don't know. But I'm a proponent of lifelong learning. So whatever your passion is, whether you do feel like changing now or maybe you feel you want to change later, maybe follow your passion and get yourself skilled in that area. Maybe you're already skilled in the area. And if you are already skilled in the area, the important thing for the brain is that you keep upskilling yourself. Actually, I'm going to talk about, there was an order of nuns. They were called the Notre Dame nuns. Quite an interesting story. The study began in 1984, and the study is ongoing. So this order of nuns, they donated themselves to science, dead and alive. Do you know? So they were studied while they were alive, and then they were autopsied. And this study is still ongoing. But there was one particular nun, Sister Bernadette. She was educated at an early age in life, as were a lot of the other nuns, because they were all teachers. She kept educating herself, kept getting her skills updated and wanted to know more and more and more. Her mind was so sharp, she could tell the time of day to within 2 or 3 minutes of accuracy without looking at a clock. So that was one interesting thing about her. When she died, and they did the autopsy on her brain, she had severe lesions of Alzheimer's. Isn't that interesting? That her brain, her neurochemistry, or she was so neuroplastic because of her lifelong learning. When one neuron would sever and she'd forget something, she'd already have remembered it by overwriting the original neuron in another way. Because neurons themselves, they seek each other out in the brain, providing your brain is active. So that's an interesting... So actually, the reason I have slides is to prevent myself from going off on tangents like that. It was just an interesting story that I wanted to add in there. So is change the right thing? There, I'm back to the brain again. Change maybe is the right thing, maybe it's not. It depends on your reasons for change. Because there is a price to be paid for change. There's also a price to be paid for not changing. Stress is probably one of the most important reasons to change or not to change, because what happens in the brain. So first you have the amygdala. That's the very center of the brain. It's in tiny little part of the brain around here. That's your oldest part of the brain. As I would say, it's the part of the brain that's always hungry, always horny. Because that's what it does. Its function is to keep us alive and keep the species procreated. Then around that, around here, you have the hippocampus, and then your executive functions around there. The hippocampus and the amygdala are always talking to each other. The hippocampus is where your schema is built up. The amygdala then is where the stress response is always on, unless the hippocampus tells it to switch off. Now, if you're coming under too much stress all the time, what physiologically happens is, so the amygdala is down here. It's tiny. It's probably that size in relation to the scheme of the brain, but it does actually grow, and your hippocampus will shrink. Now, that'll happen if you're under continuous stress. Now, if that stress hopefully it will alleviate. The hippocampus will go back to its original size, but the amygdala may not shrink the way it's supposed to shrink again. So that's an important thing to know about continuous pervasive stress. On a biological level then in the body, there's two neurotransmitters, dopamine. We all know about dopamine. We call it the reward chemical, don't we? It's actually the motivation chemical, the chemical for motivation. So you have approach motivation or avoidance motivation. Both of them motivation. So essentially, if you're back in the wild, you're either running towards your dinner trying to catch it, or you're running away from being somebody else's dinner. After 3 minutes, it's game over. Either you're done or you've got your dinner, whichever happens. But the stress response is only ever meant to last 3 to 5 minutes. We've turned that into 30-year stress responses, paying a mortgage. And if we're under stress at work, on top of that, then what happens then, your fight or flight response activates your adrenals, so noradrenaline and adrenaline. And adrenaline and dopamine are much in the one chemical. They're the same chemical compound, with one extra, molecule. So when your adrenals are continuously active, you have corticoids coursing around your body continuously. That's toxic. It's poisonous. So either ways, if you're under continuous stress, you're going to get sick. So you're going to get either mentally ill or physically ill, but you will blow out at your weakest point. So it's one of the reasons maybe why you should consider changing if you really are under stress. It's also one of the reasons why you might consider not changing. So when you do go to change, there's all the roadblocks in your way. Do you know there are obstacles you'll overcome? There's other obstacles you won't overcome, but you will find a way around it. Your brain could end up like that. So examining the pros and cons. Well, how much time do we have? Could I have one volunteer up here, please? I'm not looking at anybody in particular. Volunteer, don't be shy. Hello, how are you? How are you? Beatrice, I'm Pat. Pleased to meet you. I'm going to ask you, how long do you hope to live? When do you want to die? 90 is a good number. Okay. So cut there at 90.
Cut?
Yeah.
Okay. Here?
There.
There, down.
Okay.
Call the ambulance.
Now, I'm not going to ask you publicly what age you are, but just cut. Okay, that's okay. So cut there at 37. There we go. Okay. That's how long you've left to do what you want to do. Do you sleep at night? You don't sleep? So how much do you sleep at night? About 8 hours?
7, 6.
7, 6 hours. So.
Oh my God, cut again?
Yeah, it's time to cut another little cut there. So roughly there.
Here or here? Oh my God.
And you eat, sleep, and drink, or you eat and drink, and you take time to watch yourself, and you travel to work as well, do you?
But it's 10 minutes.
About 10 minutes, so just a little bit more.
9 days?
Whatever you want, yeah.
I have no life. That's not fair.
Yeah. So It is important, if you are considering change, to give it real deep, meaningful consideration, because there's equally as good reasons to change as not to change. So thank you so much. Thank you. I stole that from Dr. Mark Rowe. He's a GP, and his clinic in Waterford is, it's called Lifestyle as Medicine. Might be a guy you might like to follow as well. So, when you are changing or staying where you are, I suppose this is a lot of you have probably seen this diagram before. So, it's what does the world need? What are you good at? What are you going to be paid for? That's an important concept. And what do you love? Because while there may be a gap in the market for what you do, is there a market in the gap? Do you know? So it's an important thing to consider as well. So the 5 points. Competition. If you are changing, if you're changing career completely, you are competing with people that are more experienced than you in that area. It's an important thing to consider. However, on the pro side of it, you bring skills with you to that job that the employer might exactly be looking for. Do you know? So maybe you went from hotel management into psychology. Do you know? There are skills that you pick up there that you can bring along with you. So commitment. One of the downsides of changing over is the employer might actually question your motivation. Are you here just for a look, or are you actually going to commit it if I take you on as an employee? So it's up to you to demonstrate your commitment. Obviously, if you have a passion, if you're changing and you're changing for your passion, you will be able to demonstrate that commitment very well. Security. Again, you're leaving something that you know like the back of your hand. You know there's a paycheck coming in every week. You know how to avoid getting fired. Do you know, you have lots of experience from your old job. You kind of lose a little bit of that when you go to the new job. But again, the skills you bring across from somewhere else are also equally as important in developing that sense of security for yourself. Career progression. Again, the same things apply. You're competing with other people that are more experienced than you. When you change over, you're probably starting again at entry level. However, the experience that you bring with you means you can progress up the ranks a lot quicker. Imposter syndrome. That's an important one to listen to. We often hear that imposter syndrome is a bad thing. Would that be true? Does anybody here have imposter syndrome or believe they have? A lot of hands up there. Yeah. So it is important to value yourself and know where you are and maybe appreciate that, yes, I do deserve to go forward for this job, do you know. However, it's also important to listen to it. Imposter syndrome is what prevents us from becoming narcissists. Do any of us know a narcissist? Do they have imposter syndrome? Absolutely not. So imposter syndrome tells us, particularly when we're changing, it does actually tell us what we're not good at, and it tells us what we're not skilled at, and that can prevent us from going forward with that. But a technique we use in CBT is you actually sit down, you do the list, pros, cons, and when you are looking at that new job, start with your skills. I have this number of skills, how can I apply them to here? So you actually physically need to sit down, write it on paper, because by writing it on paper, you're using a lot of different brain power for a start, and you're turning that brain power into muscle power, and you're putting it down on paper. So even if you never look at that piece of paper again, it's very much stuck up here. And also by putting it on paper, you're organising your thoughts. Whereas if you don't write it down, your thoughts are spinning around like that, like the previous diagram that I showed you with all the stop signs and bumpy road signs. That's what happens if you don't write it down. So it is important to write down. And pay attention to your imposter syndrome. Acknowledge it. Acknowledge that it's there. And the best place to start is start with a personal vision and mission statement. So essentially, it's a paragraph that it encapsulates everything that you want to be, do, and have in your life. And it sets you up. It defines what success means for you. It expresses your vision of where you want to be, and it reflects your values, goals, and purpose of where you want to be in life. So essentially, your vision is your map, and your mission is your map, and your vision is your destination. So the first quote I said, the difference between a slave and a salary, that came from Nassim Taleb. This is also from Nassim Taleb. Wind extinguishes a candle and energizes a fire. You want to be the fire and wish for the wind. And I leave you with that. And thank you very much for hearing me here today. And thanks to Jobs Expo. And looking forward to seeing you again sometime. Okay, thank you.